A big welcome to the Exit Ready Business Podcast, the show where we bridge the gap between running a company and actually being able to sell it. Did you know that last year only 14% of businesses listed for sale actually reached the finish line? Compare that to commercial property, where auction clearance rate consistently hit 70 to 80%. Here's the hard truth. As it stands today, your business might be unsellable. But your office, your warehouse, your commercial footprint, whether it's a medical centre, whatever it is, this is your gold mine. I'm David Fisher, sometimes known as Mr. Exit Ready. I'm bringing 46 years experience in business construction and property to help you turn your biggest assets into your greatest exits with my Asset First Exit formula. Today, we're applying the principles of business growth, exit planning, and buyer education to ensure your business lands in that elite 40%. Today, joining me is a business exit and intentional growth advisor in Greensville, South Carolina, in America, known for being an exit architect. For most of our listeners, the time to exit is something we put off until it's far too late. Let's have a big welcome to the show and let's get started. Tell us, how did this business journey begin and what were those first crucial lessons that shaped you today?
Yeah, well, first off, David, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be with you. I'll take your question right off the bat about how things begin and what my background is and how I got into doing this. Like everybody, I've got the professional resume and I've got the personal story, and so I'll address both real quick. I spent the first decade of my formal career working in commercial banking, structured about $500 million of debt for lower middle market companies. I got out of the big corporate world. I came down and was the COO of a tech company doing a turnaround. I've been the CFO of the 199th fastest growing company in the country. We went from about 10 to 50 million in sales in 12 months. Been blessed to be an exit advisor appointed by the SBA to their SBA Thrive program here in the US, and just had a lot of fun different things. But really where the story truly starts is my childhood. And I think what we all learn in our childhood is we learn certain lessons, right? We learn certain things about what life is about. And I think in the family that I grew up in, what I learned and what I took away from that was that, worth is earned through achievement, right? There were really two things about a good life: accumulating a lot of money, and then secondly, other people's opinions about you. That's what gave you worth and acceptance. And of course, it's completely wrong. And so I spent the next 30 years of my life really trying to prove that lesson right. Unfortunately, I achieved, I put my head down like many of us do. I grew up in a family of really humble beginnings, and I went from there to achieving success in business, cracking the $1 million net worth mark in my early 30s. But I just found personally that none of that could hold the weight of a life. And what I was seeking, David, really wasn't financial freedom. It was acceptance. It was connection. It was the feeling of being known. And yet I didn't have that in my life. And so I'm looking back 10 years ago now to that season. My marriage was in a poor place. I think both of us honestly thought we'd be better off, without the other person. And that really led to seeking acceptance outside of my marriage, terrible crisis. But it really became the turning point in my life because it forced me to confront a question that I think is a critical one. And that is, what am I actually building my identity on? And I had to find something to rebuild on that wasn't going to shift when circumstances changed. And, something that was going to bring fulfillment, something that was going to bring joy. And so for me, that was faith. I found an identity there that I didn't earn, I could lose. And so in 2019, coming out of that season, I founded Legendary Exits. And as you talked about, we see ourselves as exit architects. We help people design a business and a life that they're truly excited about and they want to move towards. And so when I sit across the table from an owner who's built something really significant, I know that deep down inside, they're often carrying some of those quietly unnamed questions that I was also asking myself a decade ago. Questions around, is this really worth it? How do I actually have meaning and purpose and significance in my life apart from business? And so I know that very personally and very deeply, and that's why that's at the heart of what we do.
So that's a journey, isn't it?
It is.
All of this, that's why I say to people, like, on this journey of life, we get programmed into, it's about accumulation, right? Fill up the bank accounts or have 20 properties or whatever it may be. And as we go on this journey, we actually become unsatisfied, don't we? I remember years ago, my greatest goal was to be a millionaire. So what did I do? Became another millionaire, and then the development world came along, I made more and more. Then the GFC came along and wiped out that whole process. It just knocked you off your boat, didn't it? I think that was the time that I actually, for me, when you were talking about relationships with your wife, I actually parted at that time. And the crucial part of everything that we were trained and thought about, this is what we should be, kind of broke that whole mold. So everyone's in the same boat, aren't they?
Yeah, we really are. I mean, we live in the society of the Instagram life, and everything looks perfect, everything looks curated, right? Everybody's life seems to be better than yours. But really that's not true. And really deep down inside, I think we're all, seeking to live a good life, whatever that means for us. And I think that that's the critical question. We have to first start with who am I from an identity point of view? Who am I? And particularly for the business owner transitioning, who am I becoming in that next chapter when the business isn't my primary source of identity? And of course, what's my purpose? And then, how am I going to tease that out each day? So 100% agree. I think we're all asking the same questions.
I like it when you say about purpose, because purpose is a big thing, I think. Like when you get out of bed, like yesterday we're at an event, online event, all day, and there was this guy that was really trying to build out, this is all to do with AI and all the rest.
Yes.
I was so inspired. This guy was building out the stuff in Gemini and all the rest of it. He was 87 years old.
Wow.
And he was on it. Like, I tell you, I was like, holy smoke. But he didn't need it because his background was actually in real estate. He pretty much owned Century 21 in Canada. But it was his driving purpose. And he was trying to help the young people get themselves, hey, you have to rethink from this, there isn't jobs for you. You're going to have to be the next entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I think, if I can chime in that real quickly, I think, at least in the U.S., I can't speak to, you guys in Australia, but at least in the U.S., we've had this dominant idea sold to us. And of course, I'm 44. I haven't retired just yet, but I feel like I'm living a life that I love to live, which kind of is retirement. But we've sort of been sold this piece of like, you work hard and then you just stop. Retirement seems to be this sort of stopping, and I'm playing my golf game, or I'm going to the beach, or I'm doing whatever I want to do. And I think an entire generation of people has figured out that is just not satisfying. And, it doesn't mean that you have to do something to get formally paid, but I think everybody has a purpose of what they're here to do on this earth. And I think each person needs to understand what that is for them, and they need to be living a life in alignment with that. And I think when we stop doing that and we call it retirement, that's where people really go to dark places and unfortunately have a lot of depression and other sorts of crises of identity.
Oh, 100%. When you go and look at it, I believe in God. I look in the biblical concept. There's no such word as retirement. So why is that? There's lots of other things in there, the parables, there's a whole lot of lessons in there.
Yes.
But if you look at that, it was always that everyone had a different role throughout life, didn't they? You had the children, you had the parents, you had the grandparents, but everyone, like the grandfather was the mentor, the coach for the son. If you look in a Jewish type environment, they started, 13, was it? Something like that. The father starts training the son. Then his father, the grandfather, is mentoring him. As they evolve through that part, when you go and look at ourselves, here we are today, built up all of these skills and knowledge and wisdom. The whole greatest thing to do is pass on wisdom, isn't it?
Yes, it is. So, really the essence of legacy, right?
Yes.
So one of the questions that we talk to owners about as we help them think about their purpose is we say, hey, you've accrued more than just money in your lifetime, David. You have wisdom and knowledge and connections and influence So how do you want to steward that in the next chapter of your life? What do you want to do with that? Do you just want to toss it all to the side and go sit on a beach? And I think the true answer is, for 99% of the people, they don't want to toss it aside. They want to have autonomy over their time in the next chapter, for sure. That's probably one of the greatest things I hear from entrepreneurs. I want to stop living my life by the calendar, in the tyranny of running a business. But most people, the aspirations of what they want to do in the next chapter are related to strengths, wisdom, things they enjoy doing now, just in a different application.
Oh, totally. I say to people, don't retire. Lots of people say to me, why don't you've been in this world, you've done all right and whatever. I'll be 64 this year.
Okay.
People keep saying, so you're going to retire next year? I said, no. Why? You know what I mean? It's like, this is a new life. Doing all this AI, I come off a construction site, obviously we have software and things like that, but in comparison, it's like a totally different world. I think this is what ignites me today. I feel like a new kid on the block with new toys and the cot, as they say, by doing something new. I feel so much more refreshed. That would be the word. Because before I was just, you'd done all these things. You started off as a apprentice carpenter long back in 1980, long time ago, and worked your way through, did the development. I covered a lot of areas. I honestly think it wasn't, when we're talking about our purpose, what we were created for, was a lead up to it. I think if we go on this discovery, I think that's probably one of the greatest things that can peel the onion, as they say, to see really why we're here.
Yes. Yeah, fully agree. And even in what you've just shared, I can tell, and this is very true for entrepreneurs that we work with, and we take them through a personal vision process around identity and purpose in their average day. But a lot of what I heard from you is part of your identity, and that is, yes, you were in the trades, right? And you learned to do certain things in the trades and ultimately rose up to different levels. But what I'm hearing from you is you're actually a person who loves to learn. You're probably a curious person. And part of the reason you're doing what you're doing is because you have this thing that's unique about you that's not always true of everybody else, and that is you like to learn, you like to move on to the next thing, and that's part of who you are. That's part of how you've either been made or how you've shaped yourself throughout your life. And I think that that's something that if you were a client of mine, I would call that out and I would say, hey, David, that's probably part of your identity. It's probably part of who you are. And so how do we need to think about that tying into your purpose and how you show up on an average Tuesday?
It's an interesting comment because in the trades, I didn't do well at school. And so you put yourself into a box. I can't spell, I can't do this, I can't do all of these things. I just scraped through, which literally I did. It took a long time. It took until I was 40 years old, and I actually went off to university. I did a graduate diploma in valuation and property management.
Wonderful.
And what I did to do that was, the first one was Introduction to Business Law. That was my first one because over here, well, I was in New Zealand at the time, Massey University had summer school. So if you got that, that was the first year to give you the prerequisite for the next years.
Yep.
But literally, I've read this book. I actually put the first assignment, got 35, and I thought, I'm no good, I can't do it. It's just like school days again and all this sort of stuff. Then I got hold of someone that had already going through it in the same place. He said to me, you haven't got the structure right, you haven't got this right. Buy this book and look for a course. So literally I read this book. It was a little book, How to Write for University Standards. But the other part was I took on this course. It was how to go from C's to A's with the least amount of effort, something of that type.
Okay.
Anyway, I found my learning skill. So my learning was visual. So, but I didn't know that. So I would literally get an A4 sheet of paper, write up all these things, highlight books, I still do today. You'll love this. Even today as I'm doing things, I highlight them. But I learned how to learn. I'd just like to say to our listeners that in that process of discovery, you actually have to learn how to learn. So reading a textbook was never going to work for me. I followed the system and literally I did get a C, just sneaked in after that. I got a C from there, and as I moved my way up, because I went to second year, third year, and fourth year levels, I literally were getting A's by following that. That's what the biggest part is, that in our identity, it's so easy to say that we can't learn or we can't do this. So then from there, I bet that the thirst of it doing all these different things just increased, where people say this was difficult. I just really want to emphasize that. Discover the way to learn. We're all different.
Yeah, 100%. And I would riff on that and just say, I think self-understanding, and this is a great application for business. You know, you're manifesting a part of this here, and that is understanding myself. So self-awareness, I believe, is the foundation to great management and leadership in business. Why? Because if I don't have enough perception to understand who I am, both, you know, physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and sort of, okay, how do I get, particularly in knowledge work, how do I, you know, when am I best suited to do work, or who am I and how do I show up in conversation and how do I communicate well, as an example, with other people who are different than me? If I can't get that down, how do I expect to help other people in their career get that down? So one of the things I love about what you've shared is that you've clearly been a student of yourself in the area of how to learn. I would say being a student of yourself for anybody who's a business leader, whether that's how you learn, whether that's the things you're interested in, whether that's your personality and what your strengths and skills are, whether that's how to communicate well with others by first understanding yourself, those are power moves. And those are really force multipliers as you move throughout your life, not just in business, but in life.
Oh, 100%. What you're saying there is that don't start on the business, start on yourself.
Yes.
Understanding yourself, get yourself in that best position. Yeah. Someone, for example, at the end, but we've got people that obviously are going to buy these businesses.
Yes.
What would you recommend to someone that I'm looking at buying a business? Where would they start?
Yeah. How to go about buying a business? Well, I mean, I think the first thing that I would just say to people, at least in the US here, obviously there's an incredible focus on entrepreneurship through acquisition. So, hey, I'm going to leave my corporate job, I'm going to go buy a business. And there's a lot of online influencers that I won't throw shade against that, you know, teach it and make it sound really easy. What I would just say is, I think you first have to ask yourself, again, do I understand myself well enough that I can succeed in business? So I'll share a couple of things from my story. When I left, you know, commercial banking, which was 12 years ago now, that was where I spent the first decade of my career. Well, the first thing I did was I moved 1,000 miles from the Northeast to South Carolina, where I live. My wife was 6 months pregnant with the first child. I changed industries. I became the COO at a custom software and data analytics company. As a banker, I was like, oh, I understand what it's about because I was loaning money to these businesses, right? But this was a turnaround. And when I showed up, there was 2 weeks of cash in the bank. And man, I thought I understood risk and I thought I had a high risk level. I didn't understand that at all. And compared to what I felt when I stepped into that business over the first month, it was overwhelming, right? And so I think a lot of times when you're looking at opportunities, maybe a first thought, when you're looking at opportunities from the outside, but you've never done something before, it's easy to look at it with all of the positives. But I think we have to look at it as pragmatically as possible. And really, how do you do that? Well, I think you find people who have been there before you, who actually have bought businesses, who actually have operated businesses. You really seek to understand yourself. You seek to say, hey, am I really a fit to do this, right? So I think that would probably be a starting point for me and the advice I give to folks who are thinking about all that. I mean, there's a lot of technical stuff we can talk about, but I think that's a foundational point.
Interesting that the overwhelming and like the mentors in your life, those two parts there.
Yes.
If we go a little bit deep, what did you feel in that overwhelming? Because obviously a lot of people going through that stage for the people, not only the buyers, but the sellers as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, I entered into a unique situation where I was stepping into a role at a custom software development company that had grown and then actually was in a decline, had been through several rounds of layoffs, and we were trying to pivot the company because the brand was confused and all those sorts of things. But yeah, what was the overwhelming part? The overwhelming part was that we only had 2 weeks of cash in the bank when I showed up. But I think just in general, here's a principle that I've distilled from this, and I've lived by it, and I would say the clients that we work with benefit from it. And so I'm going to give you a decade of hard knocks. And that is, the recipe for success in business is radical clarity coupled with action. When you have radical clarity, then you can take action, and then you see purposeful movement. So you say, well, Micah, how do I get radical clarity? Because this is a concept that applies to, what should I do in my business right now? Should I develop this new product or that one? Should I raise prices or lower prices? Should I leverage an inbound go-to-market strategy or a partnerships channel for go-to-market? Any topic, you have to come to clarity and act on it, right? So how do you come to clarity? What I find with most founders and most leaders in business is that we're overwhelmed with too many options. And when we get overwhelmed, we know from psychology that we don't move forward, we don't take action. We say, well, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. So then what do? I do nothing. So I think the first question that every business owner has to ask themselves if they're feeling overwhelmed is, do I have radical clarity about what to do, and am I taking action against it? Or if I'm not taking action, it's probably because I don't have radical clarity. If I'm not seeing results, it's probably because I'm not taking action or the right action. So again, the foundation is radical clarity. So then I come back to this question, well, how do I find it? If I'm overwhelmed right now, how do I find radical clarity? I would say you need to take options off the table. But very frequently, if you've never walked a road before, you don't know what options to take off the table. Very frequently, if you're overwhelmed, you're not going to do this by yourself. You've got to find somebody else. Now, that somebody else might be an advisor or a consultant like me and my team. That somebody else might be a peer in your industry. That somebody else might be a business coach. That somebody else might be a friend who's had success in business, where they're willing to sit with you and say, help me get to clarity so I can get out of paralysis and start taking action. And that is a recipe for success that I've seen over and over in business, and we have to keep coming back to it in every issue in business. Clarity, couple it with action, you're going to see purposeful movement.
So I love it where you say, go to someone that's actually been on that journey before. That's why the show's here. You've got two great advisors here that are going through these different journeys, transitions, and all the rest of it. Whether you are our listeners, there's lots of people that are contemplating on what do I do next, and very much part of what we call the pre-exit. Yep. Then there's some people right in the middle of it, and they're going, oh, these brokers, these people, the due diligence, I'm still trying to run my business, and they're demanding all this information. Then you've got the other people that have just sold their business, they got $10 million in their bank, and they're going, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So this is why we're here. This is why the show actually exists at the end of the day. This is why we do what we do, because you've got the greatest mentors in the room, which then we know a whole lot of other people on that journey. I'd like to actually share, while we're on that little part, is that we're actually writing a book. We've got one co-author, and it was part of our journey. And it's probably a surprise to actually bring it up on the show, but let's bring it up because we're on such a great journey here, called the Exit Ready Insights. It's all about those 3 steps.
Yeah.
So we're looking for people like yourself. How can they help on that journey of people? Because we can't do it on our own. Some people, like you've actually stepped through a series, you haven't got to the post-exit. Our first person was actually through the whole, and literally was on an interview like this. And we had such a good time, but I would have known him from before.
Yes.
And he said, I'm in. And I said, well, I have no idea how I'm going to do this, whatever. And he goes, don't worry about that. I've helped 12 other people for books and all the rest of it. And he said, I think you're going to do more than one book. I don't know if we can fit it all in one book.
Yeah.
He said, but let's start with the first draft, and then off we go. You might land up with a series of different books. But literally that came from a conversation about 6 weeks ago with someone. How can you share all of this stuff? Because you have this, you have different people in your life. I was like, the word exit ready is like, that's part of designing your life. It was like, How can we do that? But each stage is a totally different place to be, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, I mean, I'll give you my quick feedback on this. I think the challenge of selling a business is evidenced by the fact that, one, I shared this with you earlier, David, before we started recording, but McKinsey, the big consulting firm McKinsey here in the U.S., just 30 days ago, February 26th of 2026, they released a report. And in the report, they were talking about the fact that the U.S. advisory system and banking system and ecosystem just isn't really set up to help businesses transition well. It's set up to start and to grow them. They cited that about 92% of businesses that exited in the calendar year of 2022, which they studied, they exited by just closing the doors. I think we also see the stat that for the very small percentage of businesses who do actually sell, the vast majority of those owners have deep regret afterwards. And a lot of that's very personal. And so I would say, I think there's at least 3 dimensions to creating a strategy and getting ready to sell. There's a personal dimension, there's a financial dimension, and then there's a business and a legacy dimension. And so the way that we address that at Legendary Exits is we say, hey, everybody needs an exit strategy. We've got the Legendary Exit Blueprint. It's our roadmap of how we get companies ready. 19 steps under the hood, but really 4 big buckets of work. And the first is an exit strategy, and it really revolves around 8 questions. And I would sort of serve this up both to you and to anybody who's listening as an assessment to say, hey, are you really ready? Are you growing intentionally, or are you moving intentionally towards the exit, or are you just drifting? Because you're only in one of those 2 places. You're either drifting towards an unintentional exit, or you're growing intentionally towards an exit. There's no middle ground. And so here's the 8 questions real specifically. And this is what we answer with clients in the first 3 to 6 months of working together. 1, do I know what my company is really worth? Not my opinion, but an outsider's opinion. That's evaluation. 2, have I assessed my business financially to know if it's in the top 25% of financial performance in my industry? If it's not, why not? Because that's what buyers are looking for, and that's what's going to drive your valuation. 3, would I be able to pass due diligence if I went under a letter of intent today? Right? So here in the US, we have SIMs and we market companies, and then we go under an LOI, and then we have due diligence, and then we close. There's a lot of people who get offers through LOIs, but they never get to closing, or they get beat up because they are not prepared to meet the expectations of a buyer. So that's first 3. The next 4 are very personal. First 3 are about the business. Next 4 are personal. What is the life of abundance that I plan to live in my next chapter? Is it defined? Is it in writing? Have I reviewed it with my spouse and 2 or 3 mates or friends? Have they weighed in and said, yes, this is real, this is you? 5th question, what's my timeline for transitioning? 6th question, who am I going to sell the business to and how? And do I really understand the mechanics? Do I want to do an internal sale to management or an ESOP? Do I want to do an external sale to private equity or a strategic? Do I know the expectations? Do I know the flow of cash, the taxes, all that sort of stuff? And then that leads, of course, to a 7th question, and that is, what is my freedom number? My personal financial freedom number. And that's where we encourage and we quarterback this with clients back in with their wealth advisor. We say, hey, let's look at all the assets and the income streams they've got now. Let's look at what it would be if we achieve this exit scenario. And what's the number that they need, right? And if you've answered those 7 questions of where the business is today and where I want to go, well, then it enables you to answer an 8th and a final question that's part of an exit strategy, and that is, how do I bridge the gap? How do I get there? I would just say to anybody listening, if you haven't answered those 8 questions, you're not ready to exit. You haven't put in the work, you're not going to meet the expectations of a buyer, and you're going to have regret on the other side of that exit. If you've answered those 8 questions and you're running your business and transforming your business in light of that, you are headed towards a purposeful or maybe even a legendary exit.
I love all of that. That is so, there's so much in there, but the first part I love is that the concept of growing into an exit.
Yes.
I have never heard that. I love that because people, it's a drift down, isn't it? When you said before about, are you drifting?
Yeah.
Most people, I know people that have retired 2 years ago and they were high performers, and today They've drifted that badly that they're struggling finding their car in the car park. But to growing into your exit and then starting on those 7 questions. I love the abundance, freedom, all of those things. This is something that no one thinks about, is it really?
Agreed. And I want to give a reframe in this moment about a very big misconception about exit planning, right? Here's the reframe. People think, when I'm ready to exit, then I'll start preparing. Wrong. Exit planning and growth strategy are 2 sides of the same coin. That's the reframe. You're growing. The question is, what are you growing? Are you growing top line revenue, or are you growing transferable value? Are you growing a bigger monster that takes more of your time, or are you growing a business that creates optionality for you? Because here's what I've figured out, David, is that issues in the business that we experience today that are keeping us from living the life that we want today as business owners and leaders, we're paying for them twice. We're paying for them once today in elevated stress, lower profits, all the things that keep us from living the life we want today. But here's the double whammy. Those same issues that you're experiencing today and feeling the pain of today, you're going to get discounted on your valuation when you go to sell because of them.
Wow.
So really, if we think about it, what great exit strategy is, and Stephen Covey language, I love Stephen's book, The 7 Habits. He says, begin with the end in mind. So anybody who's growing, you need to begin with the end in mind. And when you do, you grow intentionally, because intentional growth and exit strategy are really 2 sides of the same coin.
There's so many nuggets in there. Most people you hear, it's dependent on the business owner, that's why you can't sell, which is true. It's not like it's not
true
correct.
The vast majority of the time, right? So the question everybody should be asking is, what would it take, what would have to change in my business for me to go on vacation for 2 weeks, for nobody to call me, and the business to grow in spite of my not being there?
Yeah.
If you answer that question and you identify the issues that are keeping you from going away on a trip for 2 weeks and having the business thrive and grow while you're gone, you've created your backlog of things that need to happen to make the business run without you.
Yeah. Someone suggested to me was that set up like you called a mini retirement. So do like 100 days.
Yes.
Do 100 days where you step aside. And I thought, what a great concept that is. And that actually led us to, in our transition and back to going back to mentors, of chopping up the year into modules of 100 days. So before I got my real estate license, it was like, let's do 100 days in construction management, because I consult to different companies.
Yes.
Do 100 days in advisory, and then do 100 days in real estate. Like you're mixing it among, but it started at 65 days overseas. And you could mix that where you think, okay, I'm going to do 100 days overseas, 65 in, say, construction management as I filter that down, but a whole range. And I was like, wow, this is really powerful. I started on that part of the journey. I thought that was exciting, a starting point.
You know what you're teaching us, David, is you're teaching us to design a business and a life intentionally. So most owners that I talk with, they say, well, here's where I am and I want to do a little bit better next year. You know, I took off 2 weeks last year, but I want to do 3 this year. We generated 12% to the bottom line last year. I want to do 13% this year. There's this concept of incremental progress. The beauty of beginning with the end in mind, right? Or just saying, what's the life I want to live now? You could start from either place. Is you're not focused on incremental progress. You're saying, this is the constraint. How might I get there? What has to be true in my business? And maybe it means growing at 30% year over year instead of the historical 8. Maybe it means radically changing how you lead and delegate and empower others so that you can be out 65 days a year, right? And the business thrives. But I think what you're teaching us in that story that you just shared right there is intentionally designing the business and the life that you want. And I think that's a foundational piece to actually living that life.
Well, I did have some help along the way, I have to say. I'm part of that Tony Robbins RPM, which is Results, Purpose, and Massive Action Plan. So as you were talking about those different things, And all of us need, that's what I'm saying, none of you go into a different adventure, you can't do it on your own. That's 100%.
Yes.
So I tried, and then a year disappeared because the same as you were talking before, you've got too many options. It's like, I could do this, I could do that, I could do all of these things. And that was the first thing. It brought it down to what's that one thing? So they have bundles, they have a whole lot of things, but what was that one thing that you're doing? And I still continued the coaching today. It's actually this afternoon. But it's very important that we can't, just because we get to that stage, we still need to continuously have someone supporting us, someone in that realm wherever you're at. So I'm just saying to people that just because you might be 60, 70, 80, or everyone needs a mentor.
Agreed. Yes. Yeah. None of us see it clearly. None of us, including myself, are able to go, there's the African proverb that we all know, and that is, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go long, you run with others. I'd probably have butchered the quote, but it's something to that. Basically, if you want to be in consistent tempo on the marathon, you do it with other people. If you want to sprint, you go solo.
Yep. I tell you this is a fantastic conversation that we're having. Let's dig into a couple of those. We've covered so many things on this podcast today. If you had, say, 4, we'll just say gold nuggets. I love the word gold nuggets.
Yeah. That
our listeners, because we've covered a lot here, I've got a whole page full written down here with different things. What would those 4 great nuggets? If you said, right, I'm going to start with the pre-exit. I'm a person that's at that, what am I going to do? I've got no idea.
Well, I'll give a caveat as I approach these 4, and I'll say, I'm giving, the 4 nuggets I'm going to give are to certain companies at a certain size in their maturity, right? So in my practice at Legendary Exits, and we work with clients all across the country in the US, some internationally, we tend to focus on businesses that are doing roughly 10 to 100 million in sales. A floor of about $1 million a year in profit or EBITDA. Selectively, we'll take on a client a little bit lower than that if they're really intent on, getting over that $1 million in profit or annual EBITDA hurdle. So some of what I'm about to say, if you've got a very, very small company doing $1 million a year or $2 million a year, you take it with a grain of salt. It may not apply to you, right? And that's the discernment of receiving advice that we all have to discern is, who's giving it, and is this really relevant and a fit for me, right? Because there's so many businesses out there as an aside that are doing $2 million in sales, and they think they got to go hire a chief operating officer, and that's just not the truth. But just because they've heard people talk about that is one example. So yeah, four big nuggets. Big nugget 1 would, and some of these are just reiteration in quick fashion of what we've already talked about. Nugget 1 is this: you're either growing your company intentionally towards the exit you want, or you're drifting. There is no middle ground, right? And you can sit here and say, well, this guy kind of leads an exit advisory business. It's very self-serving. Well, no, I've been an operator. I've been a COO, I've been a CFO, I've scaled businesses. I've been a banker who's funded the businesses. I bought businesses. I'm doing a $250 million roll-up right now in the HVAC space with some partners. So I make this statement very intentionally that your team is putting in effort today. You have growth strategies today. Where's that taking you to? And are you actually growing enterprise value, transferable value, or are you just growing revenue and profits, right? So that would be just one quick thought. The second quick thought would be, you have to stop thinking about this and stop putting it off and start taking action on it, right? And again, we talked about that. Why should you take action on developing an exit strategy? 50% of the time people are forced, unfortunately, to sell their businesses for reasons outside of their control. The second thing, you don't raise the value of your company when you go to sell. A lot of people think, I hear people tell this, oh, you can step in and polish the business up. I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. The time that you build the value was 3 to 5 years before you go to sell the business. By the time you go to sell the business, the folks who are brokering them, etc., they're just doing the best that they can. to market your business and get what they can for it, right? Sure, can you do certain things with the books and blah, blah, blah? Of course you can. The real time to grow a business that somebody wants to buy and to drive the value up and to make sure that it's going to meet your needs and all of that, that was 5 years ago before you sold. And so here's the question. Do you really have 100% certainty about the fact that you're going to be able to sell on your timeline and you know when 5 years out starts? You don't. So what should you do about that? You probably should start doing something about it now. And what I would say you should start doing now is go to our website at Legendary Exits, even if you don't work with us, but revisit those 8 questions that I laid out in this conversation that comprise an exit strategy. Hey, where's my business at today? Right? Knowing your performance today from an outsider's point of view is going to help you get focused on the right things. Secondly, where do I want to go personally? Right? And then thirdly, you're going to bridge the gap between those two things and create a strategy. Right? So I would just say, you're either growing or drifting. Stop putting it off and start taking action on it. And part of the reason why some listeners are not taking action is because they do get a lot of joy out of the business. They haven't thought about the future, so define that. Or secondly, get really clear. Stop thinking about 7 ways you can sell the business and get clarity and narrow it down to 1, right? But again, most of us aren't going to do that on our own. That isn't true in my career. David, you mentioned being part of Tony Robbins' group. We get clarity in the company of others most frequently.
I'm just going to stop with that one with clarity. Sometimes, like here we are in a place called Myrtle Beach, and it's good just to walk along the beach and just think.
Yeah.
And, I'd like to add just one part to that on the clarity and even asking those questions. Just get away from your environment.
Yes.
Go somewhere where it's quite different, somewhere that's not with a computer or a laptop, just a notepad. Just take a notepad and just write down those 8 questions.
Yes.
And you mightn't be able to answer them straight away, but at least it gets you to think and write down what you could beside them.
Yeah. I think the beauty, I'll put in one last plug for folks to work with somebody outside of themselves. I will put in a formal plug here for formal coaches, consultants, advisors who are worth the money, because there are many who are not, let's be honest, is when we try to make decisions on our own, oftentimes what happens is we're limited to what we know. And almost like somebody who's never worn eyeglasses, but their eyesight deteriorates. I had this experience when I got to college 25 years ago. I was sitting in the back of a lecture hall, and I was like, I can't really read what's on that slide up there. It was like the first time in my life. And I went to the eye doctor, and they're like, oh yeah, you need glasses. And when they put the things in front of me, I was like, I could see the world clearly. But what happened is things slowly degraded over time, and I just didn't know about it. And I think the beauty of any outsider is they don't have your baggage. And oftentimes they can see things more clearly than you can see them. And oftentimes an outsider has a framework, questions to ask, a way of thinking to really help you get clear, coupled with the kind of silent reflection time you talked about, David, of walking on the beach. So I think the combo of those things, that is a dual threat to really get clear so that we can take purposeful action.
What a great session. So a big thank you for all of that. It's like being nuggets of gold. Like today was a magnificent conversation. And, just to wrap up, if you found today's conversation really valuable, please subscribe and leave us a review. If you don't subscribe to the different channels that we're all part of, then how does someone else? But share it to someone that's either on that journey of whether that pre-exit, the mid-exit, the post-exit. Someone is on that journey. We're all on a journey. If you can help others, reach out to those people and share what we've got today. And I've got a couple of things. If you're ready to stop guessing and start planning, this show is powered by our partners in the exit journey, the business exit and beyond. Your strategic partners, along with our network of experts, like today, helping them implement to ensure you don't just leave your business. Your exit is the beginning of your next chapter. For Business Exit Exchange, which is the premium real estate platform for connecting ready buyers with exit-ready businesses, they help you go through the journey of your property as we start with the Asset Exit First program. And that's where we start with your property and we build our way up. Today, I really enjoyed that, and if your business is ready to sell, it's a better business to own today. So just think of that and everything that we covered, and we will see you on the next episode. So a big thank you from both of us.